Hey everybody, this video is called Failures Behind Looking Ahead, and tonight we're going to continue our pass-through study here in the book of Deuteronomy, looking at the 9th chapter, where Moses is once again going to reflect on Israel's past and where God is bringing them. So in chapter 9 here, verses 1 and 2 starting out, it says, "Hear, O Israel, you are to cross over the Jordan today and go into dispossess nations greater and mightier than yourself, cities great and fortified up to heaven, a people great and tall, the descendants of the Anakim, whom you know and of whom you have heard it said, who can stand before the descendants of Anak?" So chapter 9 and chapter 10 here is part of Moses' speech rehearsing the sins of the Israelites at Horeb. And God was leading Israel into something that was too big for them. But the challenge would not be too big for God, and they were to trust God in order to succeed. In the cities they would battle, they were mighty, and the people were giants. They were tall and great. Yet God has called Israel to enter this battle that seems impossible, and what's impossible with man is possible with God. And there was no way that Israel in their own flesh would be able to take on these people in their flesh or on their own strength. And God does not inspire Israel with a false sense of confidence. He doesn't give a false confidence to them. God's not trying to hype them up. But what God is really doing is calling on Israel to rely on Him through the battle, the reality of the battle ahead. And the Israelites, they were going to go up against the descendants of the Anakim. And in verse 3, it says, "Therefore understand today that the Lord your God is He who goes over before you as a consuming fire. He will destroy them and bring them down before you. So you shall drive them out and destroy them quickly, as the Lord has said to you." So we see in verse 3 that the Lord God is pictured here as a consuming fire that burns everything in its path. So the Lord would be the one to fight the battle for Israel. The Lord would go over to Canaan and exterminate the Canaanites. And Israel was His tool to bring the destruction to the Canaanites. In Joshua chapter 6 through chapter 11, it shows the strength of the Canaanite military. And we see that their military in Joshua will be destroyed quickly, though the complete bringing under control would take time, as Joshua 13 verse 1 shows later. And Israel was to show mercy, or they were not to show mercy to the wicked Canaanites. And archaeologist William Fulbright, he wrote a book called From the Stone Age to Christianity. And in that book, he focuses on the Canaanites' religion and their lifestyle and their idolatry that revolved around sexual things, including hundreds of nude female pictures in forms of sexually suggestive forms. And then the Canaanites in his book, he also describes that have male idols that are associated with homosexual cults, as listed in the book on pages 232 through 235. And if you like reading historic type books, that's a book that you should check out. In verse 4 through 6, it says, "Do not think in your heart after the Lord your God has cast them out before you, saying, because of my righteousness the Lord has brought me in to possess this land. But it is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is driving them out from before you. It is not because of your righteousness or the uprightness of your heart that you go in to possess the land, but because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord your God drives them out from before you, that you may fulfill the word which the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Therefore understand that the Lord your God has not given you this good land to possess because of your righteousness, for you are a stiff-necked people." And I like how verse 6 ends right there. And 3 times here, Moses goes on to emphasize the victory would not be because of Israel's goodness. The victory would not because of anything of Israel, but because of God's goodness. And it was entirely going to be the work of God. And it was the wickedness of the Canaanites that led to the expulsion from the land. And stiff-necked people, you're going to see that word when you read the Bible many times. And it's seen as a figurative expression for people that are stubborn, or the people like Israel when they had an attitude. And Moses illustrates Israel's rebellious attitude and actions towards the Lord here. In verse 7, it says, "Remember, do not forget how you provoked the Lord your God to wrath in the wilderness, from the day that you departed from the land of Egypt until you came to this place. You have been rebellious against the Lord." And I like Moses when he speaks to Israel. He gives it straight out. It's almost like in verse 7 here, "Remember, do not forget how you provoked the Lord your God to wrath in the wilderness, from the day you were departed from the land of Egypt until you came to this place. You have been rebellious against the Lord." Almost kind of reminds me of Paul Washer in a way speaking. But Moses is challenging Israel to call to the mind of their long history of their own stubbornness and provocation of God, which led them on an extended journey from Egypt through the wilderness. And the purpose was so that Israel would recognize their own weakness and that they would turn to God, because they needed to depend on God. In verse 8 through 21, big length of verses here, it says, "Also in Horeb you provoked the Lord to wrath, so that the Lord was angry enough with you to have destroyed you. When I went up into the mountain to receive the tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant, which the Lord made with you, then I stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. I neither ate bread nor drank water. Then the Lord delivered to me 2 tablets of stone written with the finger of God, and on them were all the words which the Lord had spoken to you on the mountain from the midst of the fire, in the day of the assembly. And it came to pass at the end of 40 days and 40 nights, so that the Lord gave me the 2 tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant. Then the Lord said to me, Arise, go down quickly from here, for your people whom you brought out of Egypt have acted corruptly. They have quickly turned aside from the way I commanded them. They have made themselves a molded image. Furthermore, the Lord spoke to me, saying, I have seen this people, and indeed they are a stiff-necked people. Let me alone, that I may destroy them and blot their name from under heaven, and I will make of you a nation mightier and greater than they. So I turned and came down from the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire, and the 2 tablets of the covenant were in my 2 hands. And I looked, and behold, you have sinned against the Lord your God, had made for yourselves a molded calf. You had turned aside quickly from the way which the Lord commanded you. Then I took the 2 tablets and threw them out of my 2 hands and broke them before your eyes. And I fell down before the Lord, as at the first 40 days and 40 nights I neither ate bread nor drank water, because of all your sin which you committed in doing wickedly in the sight of the Lord, to provoke him in anger. For I was afraid of the anger, and have displeasure with which the Lord was angry with you to destroy you. But the Lord listened to me at that time also, and the Lord, very angry with Aaron, would have destroyed him. So I prayed for Aaron also at the same time. Then I took your sin, the calf which you have made, and burned it with fire, and crushed it, and ground it very small, until it was fine as dust. And I threw its dust in the brook that descended from the mountain. So verses 8 through 21 here, Moses is calling Israel to remember their rebellion back at Mount Sinai in Exodus 19 verse 32. And that's where Israel went on to worship the golden calf when Moses was gone a long time on Mount Sinai, receiving the law from the Lord. And the mountain begin to burn when Israel came back to Mount Sinai in Exodus 19:18. And the fires burned for 40 days straight, and it burned at the very time that Israel made the golden calf and began to worship it. And Moses reflected on when he broke the original tablets of the law, and Moses received on Mount Sinai that he had the 10 Commandments written on them by God himself. And Moses, he reflects on the prayer for Aaron back in Exodus chapter 32 when Aaron sinned greatly and Moses interceded for Aaron. And Moses went on to burn the idol, the golden calf. He grounded it up and he sprinkled it in the people's drinking water to show that their God was nothing and that this God that they made would easily be destroyed. And he absolutely obliterates this idol, and he makes the people pay attention on the immediate consequence of their sin. And in verse 20 it said, "And the Lord was very angry with Aaron and would have destroyed him, so I prayed for Aaron also at the same time." So verse 20, it's the only verse in the Patriarch, in the Jewish Pentateuch, which specifically states that Moses prayed for Aaron. In verses 22 through 24, it says, "Also at Taberah and Massa and Kibroth Hattava, you provoked the Lord to wrath. Likewise, when the Lord sent you from Kadesh Barnea, saying, Go up and possess the land which I have given you, that you rebelled against the commandment of the Lord your God, and you did not believe him, nor obey his voice. You have been rebellious against the Lord from the day that I knew you." So verses 22 through 24 here, Taberah, Massa, and Kibroth Hattava, they were all associated with Israel's rebellion against the Lord. And Taberah, burning, was where the people had complained of their misfortunes back in Numbers chapter 11 verses 1 through 3. And at Massa testing, they had found fault with everything, putting God to the test back in Exodus chapter 17. And at Kibroth Hattava, graves of the people had again incurred God's wrath, the complaining of the people. And they were complaining about their food back in Numbers chapter 11 verse 31 through 35. And they shined by lack of faith in God, and they were disobedient at Kadesh Barnea, as you see in Numbers chapter 13 and 14. And Moses includes that his dealings with Israel as God's mediator had been one that was continual rebellion on Israel's part, which led to him having to intercede on their behalf in verses 25 through 29. And this is what it says to wrap up the chapter. "Thus I prostrated myself before the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. I kept prostrating myself because the Lord had said he would destroy you. Therefore I prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord God, do not destroy your people and your inheritance, whom you have redeemed through your greatness, whom you have brought out of Egypt with the mighty hand. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Do not look on the stubbornness of this people, or on their wickedness of their sin, lest the land from by which you brought us should say, because the Lord was not able to bring them to the land which he promised them, and because he hated them, he has brought them out to kill them in the wilderness. Yet they are your people and your inheritance, whom you brought out by your mighty power and by your outstretched arm." So the chapter ends here in chapter 9 with Moses' intercession to the Lord on behalf of Israel. And what he's doing is he's calling the Lord to forgive his people, because the Egyptians could have interpreted God's destruction of Israel as his inability to fulfill his promises. And they would have a hate for, or that God would have a hate for his people if he was to destroy them. That is what would be in the eyes of the Egyptians. And you can find Moses' prayer back in Exodus chapter 32, more in depth. And Moses asked for mercy upon Israel, and that's because he knew of God's past faithfulness to the patriarchs. And to wrap up here, we looked at the difficulty of the battles ahead to the Promised Land. The Promised Land wasn't going to be a easy journey, and it hasn't been an easy journey. And there wasn't to be a false hope or confidence in Israel to have. They were to fully depend on God for things to happen. And likewise, Jesus never calls his followers with a hype or a false confidence in following him. Jesus doesn't beg people to follow him because it's going to be an easy walk. It ain't a quick decision to follow the Lord. In Matthew chapter 16, verse 24, I want to read it here. This is the words of Jesus. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." So when you look at the gospel according to Matthew, Jesus makes it sound like following Jesus is to lay down your life. And Jesus let his disciples know that immediately that following him it would cost them everything, that they were to count the cost in following him. And as I mentioned already, Jesus isn't saying that, come follow me, it's going to be an easy journey as a believer. But being a Christian is not a quick decision. It's a new journey that's going to bring you through many trials and tribulations. And Moses says in chapter 9 that why victory was possible with the difficult battles ahead, because on their own it would be impossible for Israel to take down the Canaanites and the giants and all that. And it was impossible without God, as John 15 verse 5 says, that God would give them the strength, as Philippians 4:13 says, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." And God called Israel to partnership in winning the battles, just as 2 Corinthians 6:1 says that we are workers together in God. And Moses goes on to warn many times, you're going to find in the book of Deuteronomy here. He goes on to warn about the danger of pride when the Lord gives them the victory. They were not to get selfish pride in them that think that they had anything to do with it. They were not given the land because of their righteousness, and Moses made that very clear a couple times in the chapter. And this was a picture of salvation by grace through faith, as we can't think that our salvation is from any of our own righteousness, that we didn't obtain our salvation, but it is only through God's grace, through the work of God, that we come to salvation and we have salvation. And all gifts are from God. They should never be used to glorify ourselves. And Moses called Israel to remember their past rebellions, which displayed who they really were. They were stiff-necked people. And the purpose of this was so that they would recognize that they were short on their own. They were weak, and that they had to trust in God. In 1 Corinthians 10:12, it says that if you think you're standing strong, be careful not to fall. And as Christians, we must remember our sinful nature, and we must walk humbly in knowing that we need God. And as Jesus said in the Beatitudes in Matthew 5, verse 3. And Moses, he went on to reflect the rebellion at Mount Horeb, and he reflected on the rebellions at Taberah, Massa, Kibroth Hattaavah, and Kadesh Barnea. In verse 19, was quoted later on by the Hebrews writer in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 21. And at the end of chapter 9, Moses goes on to reflect his prayer of intercession for Israel when they rebelled at Mount Horeb. And that's going to wrap up this video. And we are 25% of the way through, a little over 25% through the book of Deuteronomy. And tomorrow we're going to step out of Deuteronomy for the first time in a while. We're going to do a Lonely Topical Saturday video. So come back tomorrow to see what that's about, and it will be a short video. I hope you have a great rest of your night. God bless, and have a great weekend.